The sun was dipping low over the Galilean hills, and the air was cooling after a long hot day. Jesus sat beneath the olive tree with his disciples, the golden light of dusk casting long shadows across the landscape. This time of evening had become a sacred hour, a time when Jesus would share wisdom and stories that opened their hearts in ways they had never known. The disciples sat close, their tired faces reflecting the burdens they carried. They were a group of men diverse in background and temperament, each one having joined Jesus' journey in search of something greater. Yet, as they sat in the peaceful moment, there was a heaviness among them, a deep need for understanding, for peace. Jesus could sense this in their hearts, the way a father senses the unspoken fears of his children. He had walked with them long enough to know their struggles, their battles with fear, doubt, pride, and the pressure to be strong. Each of them wore their inner storms on their faces, though they tried to hide it from one another. Jesus, seeing their weariness, smiled warmly. "Let me tell you a story," he said gently, his voice carrying through the quiet evening. The disciples turned their attention to him, knowing that what he was about to share would be more than just a tale. It would be a reflection of their own lives. "There was once a village by the Sea of Galilee," Jesus began, his voice smooth and rhythmic as though painting a picture with words. "In this village stood two trees. One was a great oak, tall and proud, and the other, a willow, small and unassuming. The oak, with its thick branches and deep roots, was admired by all who passed by. 'Look at the strength of that tree,' the people would say. 'Surely nothing can bring it down.' But beside the mighty oak was the willow, a tree that bent with the slightest breeze. Its long, slender branches moved with the wind, swaying and bowing, never standing rigid like the oak. People often ignored the willow, thinking it too weak, too fragile to be of any significance. One day a fierce storm came to the village. The winds howled, the rain poured, and the sea churned in fury. The oak stood firm, determined not to move. 'I am strong,' it thought. 'I will stand against this storm as I have against all others.' But as the storm raged on, the oak began to feel the strain. It resisted the wind, refusing to bend, until finally, with a deafening crack, the mighty oak split in two and fell to the ground. The willow, however, did not resist the storm. It bent low under the pressure, allowing the wind to move it, to toss its branches back and forth. Though battered, the willow survived the storm. And when the winds finally ceased, the willow stood tall once again, having bent but not broken. The disciples sat in thoughtful silence, digesting the meaning of the parable. Jesus paused, allowing the story to settle into their hearts. Peter, as was his nature, was the first to speak. His voice was low, but there was a tension in it, a question wrapped in his words. "Master, I have always believed that strength is in standing firm, in not yielding to trials. But in your story the oak falls because it would not bend. Have I misunderstood what it means to be strong?" Jesus looked at Peter with deep compassion, knowing the inner struggle Peter faced. He had always been one to rush headlong into challenges, to confront obstacles with unyielding force. But in doing so, Peter had often been his own worst enemy. "Peter," Jesus said gently, "strength is not always found in standing firm. Sometimes true strength is in knowing when to bend." The oak fell because it believed that resisting the storm was its only option. But in refusing to yield, it broke. The willow, though it appeared weaker, survived because it allowed the storm to pass through it. It did not fight against what it could not control. This is the essence of emotional flexibility, to bend, to adapt, and to remain whole. Peter lowered his gaze, feeling the weight of Jesus' words. He thought of the many times he had clung to his own will, refusing to bend, refusing to listen to others. His temper, his pride, his need to always be right. These had been his storms, and more often than not, they had nearly broken him. "I have been like the oak," Peter admitted quietly, his voice full of emotion. "I have resisted, refused to bend, and I have hurt others because of it." Jesus placed a hand on Peter's shoulder, his touch filled with warmth. "It is not too late to learn to bend, Peter. Emotional flexibility is a gift that allows you to grow, to change. It does not make you weak, it makes you wise. To bend is not to break. It is to survive the storm and rise again. The other disciples watched this exchange, each of them feeling the stirrings of their own inner battles. They were men who had lived through many storms both within and without. Some had been hardened by life, others wounded by it. They all had something to learn about emotional flexibility. Thomas, ever the one to question, spoke next. His brow was furrowed, his thoughts deep. "Master, if we are to bend with every storm, every challenge, how do we stay true to who we are? How do we hold fast to our beliefs, our principles?" Jesus turned to Thomas, his expression full of understanding. "Thomas, emotional flexibility does not mean abandoning your beliefs. It means knowing when to hold firm and when to adapt. Life is full of storms, both seen and unseen, and sometimes the only way to hold on to your core values is to bend in other areas. Like the willow, your roots must remain grounded, but your branches can move with the wind. You can hold on to what is essential while allowing yourself to grow and change." Thomas nodded slowly, his mind working through this new understanding. He had always believed that questioning was a form of doubt, and doubt was a weakness. But perhaps in his questioning he was bending, adapting, seeking a deeper truth rather than a rigid certainty. It was a new way of thinking, one that opened his heart to possibilities rather than closing it off in fear. John, the youngest of the disciples, had been listening intently, his eyes wide with emotion. He was more sensitive than the others, more in tune with the struggles of the heart, and the story had touched him deeply. "Master," John said, his voice trembling slightly, "I have always been afraid that if I bend too much I will break, that if I let myself feel the weight of the world it will crush me. How can I be strong and yet allow myself to bend?" Jesus looked at John with tender love. He knew the burdens John carried, the fear of vulnerability, the struggle to balance sensitivity with strength. "John," Jesus said softly, "your strength lies not in denying your emotions, but in allowing yourself to feel them without being overwhelmed. Emotional flexibility is about resilience, about knowing that even when you bend, even when you are battered by the storms of life, you will not break. Your heart may be soft, but it is strong because it can bend. It can endure. And in enduring, you will find the strength to rise again." Tears filled John's eyes as he heard these words. He had always felt that his sensitivity was a weakness, that his emotional depth made him vulnerable in ways that the others were not. But now, for the first time, he understood that his ability to bend, to feel deeply, was not a flaw, it was a gift. He could be both strong and soft, both resilient and vulnerable. As John wept, the other disciples felt their own hearts stir. They had all faced moments when they had tried to resist life's storms, whether it was the storm of fear, of doubt, of pride, or of sorrow. They had believed that strength meant standing firm, never bending, never showing weakness. But now they saw that true strength came from the ability to bend without breaking, to endure without hardening their hearts. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the earth. The light filtered through the olive tree's branches, and the evening breeze whispered through the leaves. Jesus looked at his disciples, his eyes filled with love and wisdom. "My beloved friends," he said softly, "the storms of life will come for each of you. Some will be fierce, others gentle, but they will come. You cannot avoid them, nor can you always control them. But you can choose how you respond. You can be like the oak, rigid and unbending, but know that this will only lead to breaking. Or you can be like the willow, flexible, resilient, able to bend and still stand tall when the storm passes." The disciples listened, their hearts full of emotion. They knew that Jesus was not just speaking of trees but of their own lives, of the challenges they would face, the trials they would endure, and the ways in which they would need to grow. Emotional flexibility, Jesus continued, is the strength of the heart. It is the ability to love, to forgive, to adapt, to endure. It is the wisdom to know when to stand firm and when to bend. It is the courage to face the storms of life with an open heart, trusting that even when you bend, you will not break. And remember, I am with you always, even in the fiercest storms. The disciples sat in silence, the weight of Jesus' words settling deep within them. They had learned something profound that evening, something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. They had learned that true strength was not in resisting the storms, but in knowing how to bend, how to yield, how to endure with grace and love. As the night fell and the stars began to twinkle in the sky, the disciples felt a sense of peace. They knew that the journey ahead would not be easy, but they no longer feared the storms. They had learned that they did not have to face them alone, nor did they have to stand rigid and unyielding. They could bend, they could grow, they could love, and still be strong. And in that moment, under the ancient olive tree, they felt a joy unlike any they had known before. A joy that came from the realization that true strength was found not in resisting life, but in embracing it, bending with it, and trusting that they would endure. This is end of the story. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.